The human eye opens at a rather late stage in the development of the individual. He has already done the most marvelous work he will ever do. In a mysterious way, in his mother's womb, he has built a human body. And this body has organs that are directed to certain ends and intentions. And these were not the organs designed by reason, designed by consciousness. Reason and consciousness comes to itself and asks later, what is it I'm all about? What is it I am here for? Why is it I do this and that? Now, if you'll see and think what it is that life does, that life has to do in order to be life, it has to kill and eat other life. That's the basic thing. This is a rather monstrous thing. And when the eyes see what the situation is on which its own life depends, its own existence depends, when conscience and consciousness become aware of the preconditions of their own existence, there is often a sense of shock, a sense of horror. The first function, then, of a mythology is the reconciliation of consciousness to the foundations of being and the realization of their mystery as something that consciousness is not going to be able to criticize, not even going to be able to elucidate, not even going to be able to name. It is something beyond naming, beyond all definitions. That's the first point. And when that is lost, one loses this sense of awe, this which Goethe calls the best thing in man. One loses the sense of gratitude for one's privilege of having this center of consciousness aware of these things. The second function of a mythology is to present an image, a total image of the universe as consciousness is aware of it. We have to encompass the whole of what we know and see that in terms of this mystery. The image of the cosmos must change with the development of the mind and the knowledge. Otherwise, the mythic statement is lost, and man becomes dissociated from the very basis of his own religious experience. Now, the third function of a mythological tradition is to validate and maintain a certain moral order. Now, these moral orders greatly differ from one society to another. And so there is this variation from society to society in terms of the social orders. Now, some of these social orders are extremely ruthless and fierce in their requirements and extremely narrow in their demands. Individuals may be thus divorced, separated, so to say, from their own nature. The individual is born as a separate entity. He is carved up, so to say, and made to fit into a pattern that the society requires. It doesn't require a total man. It requires a part man, not an individual, but a dividuum, someone who has been divided up and put into a notch. One of the very important essential ideas in mythology and in the rites of a mythologically based culture is that the individual must be shaped. He must be made to react in the way that that culture wants. The fourth function of a mythology, then, is to center and integrate the individual in relation to himself, the microcosm, in relation to his society, we'll call that the mesocosm, the in-between cosm, in relation to the universe as he's able to know it, and finally, in relation to that ultimate mystery of which I spoke in the beginning.
Well, I hope everybody was able to check out part 1 of my human origin theory little set here I'm doing while I'm waiting for my book to get finished at the editors. And so it's real important that you have watched that, because that's the foundation for this video, because we're going to be going a bit further off the map today, which should be exciting for everybody, right? Yeah, so I'm going to turn in my voice of reason card today. At least a lot of people are going to think that, but that's okay. We're in the midst of a great awakening, and there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to seem pretty nutty that's going to actually turn out to be reality. So off and away we go. I don't know if anybody has ever heard of Lloyd Pye. Have you ever heard of Lloyd Pye? Lloyd Pye was he's passed away now, but he was a paleontologist. He was a gentleman that would go out and find things that were buried in the ground and make sense of them. And his specialty was footprints. And there were some amazing findings that Lloyd came about through his study of footprints. Now, the footprints I'm talking about are the ones that are left by ancient creatures from hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions and millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of years ago. And a creature would walk by, say, a drying riverbed, and the clay of the silt that had settled at the bottom of the river, they'd walk through, and it would leave an imprint. And those imprints would solidify and harden and eventually turn into rock, like a tree petrifies over time. And so the prints are like a stamp in history, and you can study the prints, and that's what Lloyd did, and you will not believe what I'm about to tell you. What you can find is you can know how much that creature weighed. You can know how they distributed their weight from the print. You can tell if they were running or walking. You can tell their height. You can tell if they were bipedal. You can see all of these things just from looking at the print. And so what Lloyd found was the feet of the proto-Homo sapien human, pre-human, I guess you could say, are nothing like our feet. They had like something like half or less than half the bones that we have in our foot. The way that they distributed their weight, this Cro-Magnon man, the way they distributed their weight was so efficient that he said even as a little youngster, these creatures could have walked dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of miles every week. And it wouldn't have caused them any kind of foot problems or fatigue or anything like that. And what he found was there was no way, if you look at the evolutionary mapping, how evolution puts itself together, there's no way there could be that many bones developed, the kind of articulation that we have, and the weight distribution that we carry could have made the transition to Homo sapien in that small amount of time. It would have taken hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of years to put that many bones in to develop organically, that many bones in the feet and the articulation that we have. We have humans have a very peculiar articulation in our feet, because our feet are very intricate. And the transfer of weight on your foot is called pronation. If you're a runner, you're going to know about this. This is where the back, if you're looking at your right foot, the back right heel strikes the ground when you're running, and then the foot pushes the weight of the body in a diagonal manner across the middle of the foot over to the toe, and the toe is the push-off. That diagonal movement, that transfer of weight diagonally over the foot is called pronation. And that's why when you buy shoes, they ask if you overpronate or you underpronate. Because if you underpronate, you never fully reach your toe. You're more staying on the outside. Whereas if you overpronate, you're moving your foot too far towards the toe too soon. And you're over-exaggerating the movement. And these are ways that the foot will break down. If you keep running with an over or under pronation, or a high arch like I have, your foot's going to break down. You have to have support. It's because your foot is high-toned like a sports car. The feet of those old creatures before us don't have feet like that. They're built like a Mack truck, and they'll go down the road millions and millions of miles. They're built to be driven. It's the exact same concept. And if you look at nature, is nature inefficient? Does nature make bad designs? Does nature make mistakes? You ever seen clouds that are wrong? You ever seen planets that are in the wrong rotation around the star? You ever seen a baby that's wrong? Nature doesn't make mistakes. It's no such thing. So you wouldn't ever, in Lloyd's opinion, you wouldn't ever have a foot that would develop from something that was that efficient at walking and getting through life. The requirement of moving around to survive in life would never have developed into our foot. Never. Because our foot is this high-toned, easy to break down, easy to break, highly articulate, highly artistic appendage, like our hands. I even saw I don't know if it's National Geographic or something once, where this lady didn't have any arms and she was raising like 3 kids. And she used her toes literally to make all the food, cut the vegetables. Literally, she changed the diapers with her feet. And it's because our feet are so amazing, they can adapt. You should have seen the dexterity she had in her toes. It was incredible. And that's because our feet are high-toned like that. Our voices are the same way. Anyway. Okay, well, Lloyd's point was, this would have never happened in evolution. Never. We're not as heavy-weighted, heavy-handed as these creatures were. Larger boned, larger muscle structure, more weight per square inch, denser. It's much more like the idea of an ape, just full of muscle and connections in the bones which are further away from the joint, which gives you a larger percentage of force to pull and push. These are enormous changes that Lloyd argued it could not have happened in the time space that evolution demands the development of us. Another argument he had was, what happened to all our fur? Because if we were an evolving creature, there's no way the human beings or the proto-human beings lost all their fur on the northern and southern poles. The Eskimo would have never gone smooth skin. No way. No way. They would have increased in their fur. That would have never disappeared. And it's these kind of things, this is the kind of thing I love about scientists like this, is they point out just very practical, matter-of-fact stuff that even a 5-year-old could understand. Well, that just wouldn't happen. That doesn't make any sense. If your idea is survival of the fittest, only the strong survive, only the best prepared for the environment, naturally, are going to be able to traverse through time in that environment. And we just wouldn't have become these delicate creatures that we are. Okay, now the amazing thing about Lloyd is, right now, all of the Christians are thinking, exactly, because we are made in God's image, we are perfectly made, and we are unique. We are totally unique in the universe. And that's why we are so different, and there is no such thing as evolution. That's all complete nonsense. We weren't evolved. We were created by a God. In his, notice the gender, in his image. Right? This is what all of them argue. But see, there's a real problem. What becomes painfully obvious is the way we are structured. Our backs, our feet, our muscle structure doesn't align to the gravitational pull of this planet in regards to the mass of our body. Have you ever noticed how many people in the world have lower back, I have lower back and foot problems. My wife has foot problems. Have you ever noticed? It is chronic in society. Almost everybody has some kind of foot problem or back problem, and often knee problem and hip problem. These are all joint problems. Why are they chronically like that? If we are a perfectly made creature, perfectly made for the environment that we're in, that we were created for, according to Christianity, why is the design so defunct in so many ways, messed up? I'm allergic to all grass, all pollens, all weeds, all trees. In the world, I'm allergic to all of them. All of them. I've got food allergies, get migraines, all the time. Have to deal with. Just from eating food. Garlic, I'm allergic to garlic. Just from eating garlic, I get a migraine. Okay? Plague. There are plagues that wipe out. Think of the Black Plague when it went through Europe. Wiped out populations. Folks, those kinds of things get worked out over time in evolution. And a God that creates a perfect being is not going to create a being that's going to wipe out half the population from a disease that's just local to the environment that creature was made for. No engineer that's worth their salt, that has any self-respect, would ever do what's happened. You know what I'm saying? And I'm saying this, I'm not trying to promote something. I'm saying you can't be reasonable and objective and look at all the facts and at the end of the conclusion say, one of those two is right, meaning evolution or creation. One of them's right, that's it, one of them's right. That's it. It's like putting a 2-cylinder, 2-stroke, like 90cc in a Rolls Royce. I don't care if you make that engine out of diamonds. It doesn't matter. It's going to break down because it's not made for the weight it's trying to pull. Our backs, our feet, our hips, knees are not made. They're not well designed for the environment that we're in. That's why we have so many problems. You see what I'm saying? This is a very practical thing. And the person will say, Chuck, you're splitting hairs here. And my response is, am I? Am I?
That's it. Next slide. This is a human foot stepping off. Just, we all know how this works. Heel strike, roll through the arch around, come off and press off with the toes. We all know that. Next slide. Here's it graphically. Come down, heel strike, swing it around the arch, cut over into the ball of the foot, which is your thrust generator, out the big toe, and the others are balancers and thrusters slightly. Everybody got that? Next slide. This is a photogrammetric analysis of the Laetoli track with a human track. And this is just looking at the pressure points, the pressure ridges in it. Now, I'm sure you all can see what I see. It's pretty different. It's pretty different. It's very different, in fact. Very light heel strike relative to this. Very light strike up here, but the two equals about this right here. And then it toes off here on the ball and out the toes, but it toes off here sort of behind the toe, base of the toe, but right in that area. And the ankle is set up here as opposed to right here. It's a very different foot. It's a very different kind of locomotion. Next slide. Here we see it reworked so that we see where the ankle is, we see where the human ankle is, and we see the force areas. The push here, the heel strike here, the great reduction in it. You know how this thing's walking? It's laying its feet down almost flat. Flat. It's not boop. It's not thumping down the way we do. It's not locking its knee. It's not thrusting forward. It's not It's not walking like us. It's walking a little more like the Groucho Marx thing, like shuffling along very quietly, very, very smoothly. Smooth down, smooth up, smooth down, smooth up. And steady, very steady. Next slide. In fact, here we see it. Again, we have hours, which causes a kind of a rotation as we throw. If you look at very slow motion, time and motion studies of walking, we're bobbling. We're not steady. We're not smooth. And over time, this movement through our feet wears out our lower joints. We're not walking as well as we could or should walk. These guys are. This is a very smooth, very steady, very clean. You could just keep motoring on this and not wear out very much. It's very smooth, very different, and most importantly, folks, understand this, it's better than the way we walk. At 3.5 million years ago, the Australopithecines are walking better, efficiently, more efficiently, better biomechanically than we do today.
To me, it's one of those things where this society, if you don't buy into evolutionism or creationism, you're an outcast. And so someone comes along and starts to talk reason with you about these theories. People are just like, what? You're an idiot. Of course it's not like that. You see, and that keeps people locked in a particular mindset. And one of the big things that's happening right now in the Great Awakening is people are being awoken out of their particular mindsets. And they're realizing that they've been living in social orders. That's what's happening. And so when I come along and I say, hey, let's talk some reason to these theories that you got here. If you're not going to be open and willing to consider alternate theories, you're never going to grow. You're never going to grow. You're going to stay locked and complacent in the same belief system you've been in since you were a child. Is that a good idea? Is that a well-seasoned approach to life? In my opinion, it isn't. And so Lloyd Pye went on to discover a few other things that got even further than just footprints. He noticed that the DNA of human beings has been fused. It doesn't have a natural development, and there's no way a perfect design creature would have a fused DNA. You know, a fused chromosome. It just wouldn't. That's not the way nature would develop. And he shows this in his videos. In fact, I'll find a clip and I'll play it for you.
Next slide. I'm now going to take you off the deep end. For as radical as what I have said up to now might seem to you, we're now going to plunge off to the deep end. Because why? If humans are not pre-humans, or pre-humans are not, don't lead to humans, that they're really hominoids, what are humans? What are we? How do you account for us? The way I account for us is this. Let's go through the lesson real quick. From macro to micro in 5 steps, the human body contains 100 trillion cells. There is a nucleus inside each human cell except blood cells. Each nucleus contains 46 chromosomes arranged in 23 pairs. 1 chromosome of every pair is from each parent. The chromosomes are filled with tightly coiled strands of DNA. Genes are segments of DNA that contain instructions to make proteins the building blocks of life. There will not be a quiz. Just want to kind of go over how it breaks down. Okay, next slide. Targeted gene replacement. This is what we are in the beginning stages of really learning how to do. We're getting pretty good at it, but we've still got a long way to go. But what our guys can do now is take chemicals that will cut through gene segments and splice them out and put other things in there and see what results. And when you get really good at this, you can do virtually anything with any living thing. You can mix and match to your heart's content when you really know what you're doing. We seem to be like domesticated animals. Next slide. Cerebral cortex comparison. Now, evolution. Rat, if you take the cerebral cortex, which is the outside part of the brain, the outside covering, most closely related to intelligence, this part out here, and you peel it off and you spread it out, Of a rat, it's about the size of a postage stamp. Of a monkey, it's about the size of a postcard. Of a chimpanzee, it's about the area of a sheet of typing paper. And for us, it's 4 sheets of typing paper. I submit to you that this is not evolution. This is something happening. This is supposedly our closest genetic relative. Something happened genetically to do this. Something happened. It's clear something happened. That is not evolution. But what? Next slide. Okay, again, I want to remind you, the 12 ways humans are not primates. Bones much thinner and lighter, muscles 5 to 10 times weaker, skin not well adapted to direct sunlight, adipose tissue 10 times as much, body hair missing pattern reversed, head hair and nails must be trimmed, skulls and brains not in the same ballpark, locomotion most obvious difference, speech, throats completely redesigned, we saw that slide, sex no sign of typical estrous cycles. Now let's focus on these last 2 for a minute. Genetic disorders. We have over 4,000 and counting. 4,000 genetic disorders in our gene pool collectively, meaning you can find these 4,000 genetic disorders from Eskimos to Watusis. We all carry on average about 250. You may have 200, your wife may have 100, but if you two carry the same one, each of your children has a 1 in 4 shot of expressing it. Now, the key to this is simple. In nature, you just don't have that many. Faulty copies are done away with. Faulty products are done away with. Most things breed very true in nature, plants and animals. There are very few. Things like albinism, you'll find that in gorillas and alligators, and but being an albino doesn't kill you. It doesn't really stop you from reproducing, so you can bring that kind of a gene flaw into the gene pool. But we have a couple of dozen that kill you dead before you reach the age of puberty. There should not be a single one of those spread through the gene pool. Why? Because how did it get there? If it can't be spread through sexual reproduction, what's it doing there? It's there because of genetic manipulation. That's what all 4,000 of them are there for. Genetic manipulation. And mistakes were made and left because whoever was making the manipulations didn't care. Didn't care to get it right. They just were hurrying to get the job done. And so they left. Did they care if they were making something? Did they care if it killed 1 in 10? Did they care if it killed 1 in 100? They don't care. If they're making sentient beings like us, they're doing it for a reason, and they're not doing it for our benefit. They're doing it for their benefit. Same with domesticated plants, same with domesticated animals. Somebody came here and designed this planet to suit them. And we are a product of that program, whatever that program was. That's what I believe. That's what I would like you to consider as a possibility. Next slide. 3 primates and a human. Remember 3 men and a baby, 3 primates and a human. You have the human, chimp, gorilla, orangutan. They all have 48 chromosomes, and we have 46. Remember, we lost the 2 chromosomes somehow, some way. But guess what? That's an awful lot of DNA. That's an awful lot. How could we be even as close as we are, and we're wildly different from them, but how could we even be as close as we are if we lost 2 whole chromosomes? Guess what? This is the big secret they don't tell you. We didn't lose them. We didn't lose those 2 chromosomes. Guess what? Guess what? Next slide. Somebody fused them. The second one, somebody took number 2 and number 3 on the primates, and in us, fused it together. Why do you suppose they would want to do that? Keep the whole chromosome package there, but turn 2 into 1. Why? What if they wanted to breed us with something that had 46 chromosomes? and breed us regularly to them and create an offspring that way. They would have to combine the package and reduce it from 48 to 46 without losing any of the DNA. And that's what they did. That is what they did. Next slide. Prediction number 5. Humans are not native to planet Earth. Along with domesticated plants and animals, we have been genetically engineered by outside intervention for unknown purposes. Now, this is the big one. This is the one you may not want to jump off with. This is what I believe, and this is what I believe is going to be found to be the truth downstream. I don't know how far it'll be, but I think the evidence is jumping out all over the place right now, and nobody wants to look at it because, again, this is going to be have to be crammed down some very unwilling throats. But it is the truth, and it will come out. And whether I see it or not, you will remember that you were here tonight and heard me put it out together in this package for the first time.
Looking at that then, looking and considering what Lloyd has said, in my mind, it would be very wise to consider how this could have happened. Now, I don't buy into everything that Lloyd Pye talked about, but he had a theory that we were a fused species. And what's really interesting, meaning we were fused human beings, are created from a fusion of a natural primate from the earth and an alien DNA. And that's why there is a fusing in our chromosomal makeup in order for us to be able to mate with alien creatures. How does that grab you? What's really interesting about this theory is it's aligning directly with this Pierre Sabec gentleman that I discovered a few weeks ago. I'm reading this book right now called Murder of Reality. And what's really interesting is he is showing through what we already know, through the sacred scriptures, through the original texts of these ancient people, that's really what happened. That the fall of man wasn't sin. The fall of man was the fall of the anthropos from its natural origin, from its purity, into a genetically manipulated being. And that was the fall of man. And what's interesting is that aligns right with the Luciferian technique, which is to blame people for sins they commit, quote unquote, or for evils, that's a better way to put it, for evils they commit, blaming human beings. It's the projection thing. It's what an abusive spouse does to the partner they're abusing. They project onto the enabler, the partner that they're with, their own inadequacies, their own failures, their own dysfunction onto someone else, meaning they blame them for their problems. Meaning if they're a philanderer and they're going out and having affairs, they'll blame their partner that their partner is having affairs. So if their partner says, I know that you're having an affair, they'll turn it around and say, no, actually you are, and this is how I know that. It's a way of shelling a person. It's a way of putting a shell in front of the culprit. The culprit puts in front of themselves the person who is committing the evil act. And what you would do if you were a Luciferian, if you were this evil freaking creature, is you would blame human beings, call them sinful for their genetic manipulation, their ability to think for themselves, become self-aware and self-empower. You shame them with an idea that they are dysfunctional, and therefore you stagnate their development, you hinder their development, frustrate their development. Because if a person believes something about themselves, it's going to frustrate other ideas of development about themselves. They won't be able to see that clearly. And so by this idea of the fall of man or the fall of human from grace, quote unquote, could just as easily be translated as the fall of the anthropos out of their original embodiment, you could say. You see how big the deception is then? You see how big the deception is? This level of awareness is hard to comprehend and accept, the idea that this could have happened to us as a species, because we have these other ideas of greatness. So in other words, the person who believes in creationism, they have this divine image of themselves in the sense of, I am created in the image of God. I'm created in the image of ultimate reality. And so a concept like I'm presenting today is going to come across as offensive and degrading. And because of the ego limitation of the Christian spiritually, because it's an egocentric religion, because it's exclusive, it's the only right one, because that is the attitude of the spiritual posture of Christianity, Christians are not going to have any time or be willing to accept any reality that doesn't have them as created in the divine image of God. Do you see how that builds the ego? You see how that makes a person spiritually egocentric? Okay. The evolutionist has the same issue, because they see themselves as this incredibly awesome developed organism that is one of the highest predators on the planet, because it's all about greed. It's all about extending your life. It's all about you in evolution, because it's survival of the fittest. Do you see how these things eat themselves? So they become an egocentric maniac, right? Because the more power they gather in their own life, meaning the evolutionist, that's what gives them empowerment. The usurping, stealing, taking, gathering, hoarding aspects of life is how they feel greater. Do you see what I'm saying? It's how they establish their sense of themself. Sorry, just passed a wide load. It frustrated my thought. Okay, and so the Christian and the evolutionist, they both are egocentric, and so because they think they're right, they know they're right. It's an arrogant approach to life. And so because they know that they're right, when you come along with this other idea that's based in good practicality, it makes sense for all the dysfunction. I mean, if you think about it, all the allergies I have, all of the structural dysfunction that we have, the foot issues, the knee issues, the hip issues, the back issues, the mental issues, all of these maladaptive aspects all make sense. It's like, well, then that would make total sense, because if only half of our DNA is naturally developed from this planet, and half of it came from a planet that has nothing to do with Earth, this is what happens. I mean, it makes complete sense. And if you have a hang-up about it, if you think of it this way, because we are 50% from off-planet, we have a perspective, understanding, and way of seeing nature, our environment, our lives, that is unlike any other creature on this planet. And we can therefore beautify, realize, and evoke magic out of the planet because of our imagination, our intellect. The imagination is one of the most powerful forces in the universe. You can actually take an idea and you can turn it into matter, into reality. Something in your head. You can transmogrify it into reality. I have machines in my head that I'm going to put together someday. I'm going to invent already in my head that I'm going to make a reality. That's power, folks. That's power. And through that kind of power, you can build cities, empires. You can fly off the planet, colonize other planets. All you got to do is get the intellect to catch up to the imagination. Because we have this gift, we can organize and develop and complexify the planet in such a way that we can bring our influence into the universe, which leads right into, are we mature at this point in our history enough to be flying off planet? Have we gotten past ourselves and know ourselves enough and know our environment enough to be able to think that we could actually leave the planet and start colonizing if we haven't even gotten our home worked out? Meaning, we don't even really know our history. We don't even really know our potential. We don't even really know our origin. You see, and these things have to be known before, in other words, you're not going to be a parent until you've experienced some life. You're not going to be a good parent until you've experienced some life and heartache and pain. And then you'll be a great parent. You'll be a much better parent. In other words, you'll be a much better parent in your 30s than you will if you're in your 20s. Because you've experienced more life, you're more mature, and you're more prepared, self-aware, to be qualified to merit raising another human being. I promise you, if I'd started being a parent in my 30s, I'd have been a better parent to both my kids than if I had since I started in my 20s. I wasn't as good a parent in my 20s as I was in my 30s, as I would have been in my 30s. And our consciousness is the same way. It has to be developed. And if we're still struggling to figure out our origin, the meaning of life, the larger questions of life, if we're still struggling with these things, self-identity, individuation, getting along together, see, we have no business putting our influence into the universe, because we're just going to put more chaos into it. And so this is all part of the larger scope of developing the human species. And this is all part of the Great Awakening. Because the Great Awakening begins to prepare us as a species to go interstellar. And we're only going to do that if we have developed understanding of ourselves that is appropriate to not only ourselves but our environment. And so we behave appropriately because we appreciate these things. All of this is a part of consciousness development. Well, this is why what is happening is happening. Because our origin isn't what we think it is. We actually have a greater potential than those origins allow for. Because one requires you to be from slime and one requires you to be to be a sinner. And so there's limited development from these consciousnesses, you could say, from these awarenesses, from these perspectives of life. And because those perspectives are so limited, they won't allow for appropriate development in the same way as keeping a baby in a playpen is not going to allow that baby to develop. You can't, in other words, you can't keep that baby in that playpen through 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old. You can't do that. You're going to mess up the psychology of the child, because the child has to be given freedom to develop. Our consciousness is no different. We've been in playpens. We've been in playpens of religion, playpens of origin stories, playpens of science, playpens of medicine, playpens of government. We are children in these regards because we're dependency oriented. And in order for consciousness to develop, it's just like a baby has to learn to walk, or has to learn to crawl, then walk, then run, and then start dancing. These things develop out of the person, and our consciousness is no different. We're children. We really are children. We're still living by fear and desire. We still haven't moved past that because we still require so much of around us to be quote unquote okay or at peace or whatever in order for us to move forward. And nature isn't that safe. And so nature is teaching the culture, instructing all of us as human beings to become self-aware so that we're not dependent on these bad, fouled up social orders and social institutions that have put us in a crib and never let us out. You can love like no other creature on this planet. You can see through, you can see the things behind the things. That's a level of awareness and consciousness that is powerful, people. And this is a gift that we have, unique on this planet. And it's unique to us, not because of the reasons you think but for reasons that are outside of your comprehension. And my question today is, why does that matter so much? It matters so much that you're in accord with it. It matters so much because that gives you grounding. It grounds you in reality. It makes you relevant to yourself, to society, to the planet, because you have a fundamental understanding of yourself and your origin. And when that begins to come into place, you realize your potential. You realize your potential. It's one of the reasons why babies are so beautiful, because you see this literal ball of potential in front of you. That child can be and become anything because they have an imagination, they have a will, they have the ability to love and hate. They have all the polarity, the yin and yang in them that's in the universe. And you can see that in them because you also see it in yourself. And by no longer having this fuzzy idea of where we come from and all of the nonsense that those bad ideas develop, by understanding, hey, this is how it is, and this is why you are the way that you are, that's the license for healing. That's the e-ticket, the gateway, the flood, it's the opening of everything to understanding. And when you understand yourself fundamentally, you self-empower. When you see your gifts and abilities, when you see how and what you can bring to the world because of the way that you are and who you are, that empowers you. Because it relates you to why things are the way that they are, why you are the way that you are, why we have these characteristics about our society, meaning the entire human planet, why we are like this, and why we can get caught up so easily. Do you see lions and tigers and bears, all these? Do you see them getting caught up in psychological issues or problems when they're making a kill, or when they're raising their kids or anything, their cubs, whatever? You ever see them having a psychological breakdown? They get angry, sure. They have emotions, sure, but they don't have like these mental disorders that crush them for decade after decade after decade after decade. You see what I'm saying? We have power, folks, that is off planet, baby. And it's time to accept that and imbibe in that, baby. It's time to get excited and accept ourselves for who we are, and love ourselves for who we are, exactly as we are, and accept whatever history we have, accept whatever reality we have to accept that is reality. Come into accord with that. That's the key. How are you going to come into accord with reality with an egocentric spirituality? Knowing that you're right. How are you going to come into accord with an alternate reality? You're not. And so you won't awaken in the Great Awakening. If you're convinced you're an evolved creature, that science is right, you're convinced that Darwin got it right and it's evolution, baby, and that's the way it is, guess what? You're not going to awaken either, because you're waiting for evolution to be exonerated. You're just as complacent as the Christian, because you're waiting for Darwinism to become proven right. And there's no awakening in those spaces. Those are egocentric, arrogant spaces. And they're arrogant because they do not allow for any other thought. That's an arrogant person. And so my challenge today is to simply crack that shell, and to no longer be arrogantly oriented, but be oriented to this receptive idea. This idea of, you know what, I'm going to consider alternate options. And by considering those alternate options, you merit yourself illumination. That's nature, baby. That is natural law, natural order, natural self-organizing aspect of you at work. When you are open and willing to take other concepts that are completely counter to your own and integrate them. And so that's what I challenge everyone today to do. is to take this idea that Lloyd Pye had, to take this idea that I've elucidated for you today, and attempt to amalgamate it through your own work. Don't take my word for it. Go out and explore yourself. Cheers.